field and all this stuff.
Should we start with the official welcome and introduction?
I'm just going to get more comfortable here. Let me know if you can still hear me or not, or if I'm too far away from the mic, if I need to do the gain.
Okay, everyone. Thanks for joining. Tonight we have at least now nearly 50 on the Zoom channel and also 50 on the YouTube channel, but maybe it grows here. But it's a pleasure to invite you. We have an agenda here. Welcome and introduction, event modeling why, event modeling intro, and event modeling breakout. We hope for this to be a short part of talking, like 15 minutes each, and then spend the most of the time on doing actual modeling on the Miro boards or Miro boards, whatever you call it. But first of all, thank you to Alexei Simri from Ubiquitous for sharing his Zoom account, so we can facilitate this on Zoom with a nice account. And also welcome to you, Adam, from all the way from Vancouver. I guess you're responsible for this crazy time of the evening. You are 8 hours ahead of us. But it's really exciting with this event modeling. Remember you mentioned something about storytelling, that we are used to tell stories, and that's how we remember stuff. So, well, why don't you tell us a story about event modeling and how you came to this and why we are here now?
I guess event modeling isn't something that I set out to make. It's something that just ended up being a reflection of how information systems really are. I think part of it was trying out event storming and the format of a workshop, but I think the similarities end there, and it was more about gleaning information, gleaning some teachings from Greg Young as to how information systems work fundamentally. After I met Greg Young in 2008 and switched to event-driven development, event sourcing specifically, but a lot of messaging, full in on message-based architectures and approaches. And during that, the previous 12 years, working with solutions that are only built this way, I started to get some insight into how information systems function. And I kind of liken it to a lot of scientific discoveries, like E equals MC squared, or finding molecules and atoms and periodic table. We can say each snowflake is unique, therefore, water's complicated. But if you get a good enough microscope and enough research, you start to see that water is actually made of two simple things, hydrogen and oxygen. If you look deep enough, no matter how unique your solution is in your organization, because you are a snowflake, you are made up fundamentally of very simple patterns, which are the equivalent of hydrogen, oxygen in water. And this is kind of the last 12 years, realizing that, you may have a snowflake in your insurance company, but it's the same patterns that are going on in the other insurance company, even though they may have a slightly different solution than you have. The underpinning patterns of how information changes over time is identical. So I'm going to try and share the stream so that I can just go through kind of some of the insights and how going from domain-driven design, event-sourced systems, I circled back all the way through to regular systems. And you've already touched on the storytelling aspect and how our brains work and how we organize information systems before computers. It all ties together. It's quite interesting how realizing these fundamental, atoms of information systems helps us be more predictable, anticipate things, etc. So everyone that got the invite link should have gone to eventmodeling.org and read the couple of articles that I have on there. I'm going to just share my entire desktop. Why not?
This one, the event modeling traditional systems.
Yeah. What I like was that it talks about storytelling and the way that humans pass knowledge to each other by telling stories. This happened, this happened, this happened. It's like an event. And also you can say, for instance, a fairy tale like Snow White, you have different actors in there and you can say this happened and then have this happened, this happened. And it's the same story you want to tell about your domain. What are the users doing? What will happen? Who are the actors? Who's participating in the software?
Well, it's awesome that it's based on how people think. So like I usually paraphrase this when we meet, we talk about stories. And the stories are based on facts, and then we draw some conclusions. We've got some intentions. Those intentions will trigger some, facts, events, and then it basically is all around.
Okay, Adam is back.
Okay, good.
Cool.
I'll stop
He's
sharing.
No, wait a sec. I'm promoting him to panelist, so he was.
Sorry, guys. I'm not sure why Zoom crashed. There was a message about some internet speed problems, but
okay. Christian, can you make Adam co-host again?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So where I left off, thank you for filling in, Rafael. I didn't hear what went on while I was away, but I'm sure you guys found a way to.
Rafael was saying that we hear stories, tell each other stories that are based on facts. And I started to laugh because I never heard such stories. They're all based on fiction.
Certainly in the US political thing, yeah. It's everything.
And fiction stories, I mean, they're all based on fiction. There are no ever single real fishing story that I heard.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Yeah. Fishermen started it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So to that long story of discovering domain-driven design, event sourcing, CQRS, etc. There were all exercises that needed to be done and go through to really understand something more fundamental that great thinkers and people that did a lot of research, like Fred Brooks, who wrote The Mythical Man Month, came up with. And one of those realizations is like, if this is the true nature of information systems, then event modeling should be able to show traditional systems, irrespective of their implementations. We can do that. But there's one fundamental thing that we share, and Rafael added that already, is that events are what happens. It's the core of user experience. It's actually what happens. For those that didn't read the article, I'm going to quickly go through and show you that as we build up a system from a user interface, pardon the small writing, you can read the article later yourself on event modeling. We can start with the first user interface that someone uses, such as a registration page. It stores this fact that Rafael talked about already, which means...
Sorry, Adam, can you zoom in and make your screen a little bit bigger?
Not really. I think the images that I used are way too wide.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see what happens.
So, you can start with a blank form, which is the first thing you implement. That's the first thing a user can see. And then you can say that, well, we have this event that happens called register, and really we have the actual information in here that you have in your head. You remember your password, or at least your computer remembers it for you if you're using a password manager. Your email is this and your name is that. However, in a traditional system, what we do is we put that in a table. And this is important because this is how we can explain the difference between domain-driven design implementations and how we do things in domain-driven design versus traditional things. So if it's traditional architecture. So if you're talking to someone that's brand new from Ruby on Rails world, and you want them to understand why, you know, event-driven architectures or domain-driven design are better for keeping for implementing and maintaining your solutions, you can start this way by using words and concepts that they're familiar with. Likewise, from a business perspective, most business people understand that there's tables, and we had tabular data before digitization in accounting and many other disciplines. So it's not hard to ask a business person to understand that, you know what, this is the record for a user when they register, and this is the information we keep about them. Notice the impedance mismatch from UX and implementation. The password is not actually stored. We have a hash, and this is important because, as Fred Brooks said, if you show me your tables, I'll really understand your system. And this is really one of the first key points, is that you're showing what gets stored versus what someone had in their mind. So even though we throw away this event in terms of our implementation, it's important to have it on the event model because it captures the user experience. We can then show how we display that information as we go across this timeline, right? So event modeling is about an example workflow of real data going across the system over time, like a book. And if we understand something by example, we can fill in a lot of the missing pieces. I think the industry was too preoccupied with the how, describing the minutia of implementation details versus the what, and that is, what do we have in our system at any given time? If we explore this is the heart of event modeling, is basically saying that as I move through time, I can slice up that timeline and see on the finest detail as to why something changed and what it is that is in the system at a particular point in time. That is the best requirement that you can get. One of the interesting things as we continue to do this, let's say we add the verification emailer. Notice that our implementation had changed. The user table in this particular implementation that we chose to do, we added an extra column to this table. So before that, we didn't have it. When we were here, we realized that we need a space to store that verification code and use it in whatever way we want. This is quite important because it shows why we have a big problem in the industry and why software is such a bad discipline compared to anything else out there. Why we're 90% done, 95% done, 99% done in all our projects, no matter if we're doing agile or not. It's an absolute nightmare compared to any other engineering discipline. Not any other, I'm sure there are other engineering disciplines that suffer similar things, but for the most part, most things work off of blueprints and don't suffer this kind of rising cost, especially building a house or something. So the reason that this happens is that, as you can see, our registration page needed to be opened up. We can pretend that the registration page was our feature for feature A in this diagram. And as we continue to add features, we notice that the fifth one that we do is feature D, and that is this idea that we need to send this verification code by email. We had to crack open what we wrote originally to insert a default value or something into that table and to account for the fact that there is now extra columns, maybe foreign keys, etc. So our cost is not just implementing verification, it's actually reworking the original feature. And so a traditional system, which really means not planned, not modeled system, is this agile or just run by the seat of your pants. It's really kind of like cowboy coding back in the day. You can actually see that agile didn't fix the core problem with cowboy coding. If we, however, go ahead and not implement anything along the way, and we start with an event model that shows you where the data is going to go, right? That's important. Nothing else. We're not going to talk about how the algorithms are structured. We're just going to say, this is where the data will go because we understand what the people want to do, what their events are across the timeline, and more importantly, what information is in those events. If we find a home for them, or at least their artifacts, such as the hash value, then we don't have to revisit that implementation of the registration, for example. If we go back to the first example that we have here, sending this particular verification code does not require opening up what we wrote for the registration page. That is open-close principle, or for layman's terms, I hate using technical terms because we lose audience. So event modeling rarely makes its own language. We'll say we eliminated rework by working off of a blueprint. We don't want to have this because we work off of a blueprint, and something that's finished, we don't open up again. An analogy would be building a house without a blueprint, and someone tells you after you're done building the first floor that, you know, we need 2 stories actually. Just what a fine job you did. To have to destroy the previous walls because now they have to be rebuilt as supporting walls. That's your rework, and that's your analogy for, you know, it's been heavily criticized that you can't make analogies between software and building bridges. But that's kind of a snake oil that Agile makes you want to subscribe to, because they make money off of not fixing this curve, but by making this curve slightly less expensive. And if they can show an increase of making this slightly less expensive, they can continue to sell their approaches and their band-aids. We actually don't want that curve at all. Does that make sense?
I hope so. I mean, it's at least it's an important point that with this open closed principle that you don't have to redo what you did. I mean, that's a big thing, I think.
So this is interesting, and this is really important to do, because while in domain-driven design, we're just, you know, at most 5% of the people out there that are practicing, you know, or that are doing software development. 95% or more is doing table-based MVC applications, and you're not going to convince them, and you're just going to be another consultant trying to grab money. So event modeling is really key in showing how your state changes over time, regardless of your implementation, so that you can realize that, hey, look at these orange stickers and information in there. That is really useful information. Are you not capturing this? Oh, I guess we could add a log. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. Why can't we use the log? Why can't I just look at this? Why are we creating these SQL tables and dealing with all this kind of stuff? More importantly, allows you to add the introduction of, like, what about maintenance? How are we going to version our systems? And we all know where the data migration stories end up with traditional systems. As you move from schema 1 to schema 2 between 2 big releases, it's a nightmare. That migration of all this data that's sitting in tables to a new schema for a new version has never gone smoothly, right? With events, we can map that easily. At least with this approach, even if you are doing migrations, at least you have a much better documented data schema that shows you context within which some of those columns are used as integrations between features. So it allows you to go back and understand why some of the changes to your data from schema 1 to schema 2 have to occur. Not the best, but at least it's not as bad as the traditional approach without planning, where we don't have our original intentions captured as to how the data got in there in the first place and what purpose it was serving. But we also have an idea of what the order of operations is. So for the purpose of this this meetup, because it's domain-driven design, we'll go back to the original article, because that focuses on the 5% of people that actually want to be doing things in a logical, organized way. So going back to where Rafael was going on about this when I was away.
Just a quick question.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, please interrupt me with questions, because I think we're going to stray off.
I was going to ask if we should raise or ask. I love that you mentioned the impedance mismatch and you showed that. Have you had success, like when you're with organizations, to point that out and go like, hey, if you can do this, but if you go and do the events and store them, have you won battles that way?
Yes. It's easier to win the battles with business to understand the importance of events, but they themselves will run into the technical side of the organization, like the CTO and other dungeon masters that don't want things to change.
That's a good way to put it.
or have their job put in jeopardy because it's no longer what they're comfortable with, and they're on an even playing field with the most junior people in their organization. So it's entirely a people problem. But you
I've
can't
also
hold the
heard
truth
the
down.
others. I've experienced the other story as well.
And Microsoft experienced it quite badly with losing the entire server world to Linux, because that was logically better, smaller. It was a cost center. It wasn't actually a feature-rich thing, and they refused to admit that, and kept on the Titanic and trying to force the Titanic to float after it already collided with that. So this is a similar thing. This is why I see this as kind of a work into the nature of information systems, and really I want this to be backed by the really interesting things that Mel Conway, Fred Brooks, and all these important people already knew. This is not new information. It's just a distillation of it to apply in today's world. And this motivation part of this article actually goes over that quite well. It shows that we have had this way of working in our heads already. This is more human, right? We had really invented a whole bunch of scaffolding, band-aids upon band-aids, and other constructs which are really not necessary. And I just want to point out to one resource where, if you think event sourcing or domain-driven design are really tough, there's this tiny little implementation of a real-time board to-do list, which is implemented as a simple shell script, and it's something that you don't need to store in a file. You can just paste that into your command line if you're using Fish in this particular case, but feel free to translate it to Bash or PowerShell or whatever else you want to use. And you can just up arrow and use it, and it stores events in a file that's in a dot folder in your home directory, and works like a Trello board. But guess what? You can express that quite easily in an event model. One of the things about an event modeling and its goals is to have cadence to implementation. So you'll notice that when I want to do something, I enable something with a command, and I go to an event that stores that fact, and then those events are used in projections or views to then show that information back to the user. And that's kind of enabling people to do something, giving them feedback, informing them to do the next thing with more information. And it's a cyclical thing, up and down, input, output, input, output. And it really has an analogy to how CQRS functions in the cyclical architecture of getting input, getting output, getting input, getting output. And this kind of makes this nice sine wave across this timeline. So they can be longer or shorter sine waves if you're talking about a longer or shorter one. And it's this cadence that allows you to have predictable development. That flat cost curve is really what we're after. What we really want to get rid of is this strawman argument of big design up front. This is small design up front. We do event modeling from anywhere from an afternoon to 2 days.
Yeah, I think it's a fallacy a little bit that people kind of and I hear it all the time. So saying, okay, let's do some design. Say, oh, we shouldn't do big design up front. I'm not offering you to do big design up front. I'm offering you to not go and blindly start shoveling code into the repository and then give me a pull request after 2 weeks. That's complete rubbish because you didn't even know what to do.
Exactly.
And this is a big, I agree with you. This is the fallacy, and this is from an argument, and it goes also with the thing that's like old versus new, although I also agree with you completely. That's nothing new, like fundamentally. And people say, what if we do this in a way we always did, in 2 days, and in a way that you offer us to do in 3 months? I'm saying that's the fallacy. You're going with strawman and you want me to start discussing this, but that's wrong because that's the opposite. I can do it in 2 days, so you will be struggling for 2 months. And this happens all the time. And sometimes I'm just on the point of giving up and say, just do what you bloody want.
Can I ask a question, Adam, because you're talking about
Yes.
big design up front, because it makes very much sense with the small example you gave here, but this is just a tiny part of the system. I mean, isn't it big work or a big effort to model a whole system, or how much do you need to model in the real world?
Yeah, so the modeling for large systems actually does end up being an iterative approach. So we don't throw away the event model. This is not a one-day exercise. What we do is we take advantage of the similar approaches that have collaboration between many different roles to have them speak. But we keep this event model around for a long time to be the blueprint, and we do adjust it when we learn new information. And we can take a look at that new version of the event model and hold it up against the old one, see which parts were already implemented that have to be replaced with a new implementation and which parts haven't and are free. So we have that ability to do fixed cost projects because we can do an average for implementations if we have that cadence. It's also a really good way to clearly define a boundary between your functional and non-functional requirements. So an event model will show you the SLAs that you need. You can very easily on that timeline put in times, such as this is within 2 seconds, this is has to be between whatever. You can mark that up with those important SLAs. And the event model will then allow you to use that as well as a requirement for how fast your application is supposed to be functioning. Which has been, quite good. So yes, this is a trivial example because we want to show the mechanics, and I don't want to confuse things with a really large system. So I want to show it on the most basic things where you get input and output and some change of a schema and things like that. So,
but let me ask you one thing about the big system and versus smaller system. And I can refer to the question saying that about a model that spans multiple teams. I mean, if we get back to domain-driven design, basically that is fundamentally flawed if you have a design that spans multiple teams. I mean, if the team, we talk usually about bound context, and we normally do not want multiple teams to own a single bound context because of how this is going to work. They will need to coordinate because they will clash between teams all the time. So I would say, or in our experience, we model within the context, and if the model lives within the context, it's usually one team who implements it, and therefore the model is reasonably small. So just split the model to the context, make it contextual, assign interfaces on the border of the model and on the boundary, and then coordinate the contract, and then go from the contract.
And that's really important because it comes up as a big discussion, especially with a lot of people that are using Kafka for gluing stuff together. And what you're touching on is the difference between, let's not get into that in this one, but
no.
But what you're talking about is the difference between public and private schema. And the public schema is something that you need to not have change very often. And this is where your context boundaries and all that kind of
integration events
and integration events and all those things have to be something that's worked on as almost like a shared library, where you maybe have some way to talk about semantic versioning if you buy into that. But it's treated very differently than your internal schema to track state of one service or something like that. And how you track it with event modeling is you just give it different swim lanes. As you go here in this example that Rafael already went over, we can use this to really talk about pretty much everything in here. So the inventory system, authentication system, payment system, and an external system that's GPS coordinates coming in. So you can model all of these over time by example. There was I want to not skip questions. There was a question here from Roger that's about handling branching logic. This is specifically done so that you don't have branching logic, and it is borrowed from the idea that specifications by example are the things that work best to specify something. We are very bad at memorizing chart, what's it called, branching schemes and things like that, and activity diagrams. We're very good at remembering stories. And the first paragraph in the main article goes over that our brains are built to fill in the gaps. So we absolutely do not want any branching in an event model. It's imagining your system working over an entire year, let's say, and we kind of investigate what happened in that system, and we pretend that it exists and say, what would we like to see in terms of the data and how it changes over time? We use that as the standard to hold up our solution against, and we know we're done when our system is exhibiting that. Further to the story, yes, the more complex parts that need some branching, etc., we can have a lot of traditional by example specifications that dig into a particular piece, and usually they're done in the state change or state view specifications, usually given when then type of things that are consumable by business people, as well as people that are implementing or responsible for the implementation. So we don't want any branching, and that's on purpose. That is one of the key things where you will not have a similarity between some UML and UML elaborations, is that we find that being a real impediment to understanding and actually being able to fill in. It actually asks more questions of a person's mind than allow them to hold on to what the example is. Further, branching really complicates the idea that you can use event model for what is referred to as information completeness. And Christopher Condron, a really awesome guy from Boston, made this discovery where he saw that event modeling could save their company because they could do an audit for information completeness, i.e., if I find that I have a field here, I can trace the information that it puts in the system, and I can see where that information is used. And if I can't join information with that line, I can't find where a field is getting stored, and I can't find where a specific screen is getting its information, I know I don't have a full spec, and I shouldn't start until I actually understand that, or at least know that I'm missing that information, and I know that I have that piece of information missing, or that implementation missing. So that's one of the reasons that we don't do branching specifically. An alternate major workflow would be basically added on the end of this, saying, let's review and let's see if the checkout process here in this particular workflow fails, and then we can show that as an alternative flow further on. If we want to just have really inconsequential derivations, or maybe the difference in different types of data, how it's stored, maybe how the calculation is made, we can elaborate that on anywhere from 5 to 20 different given when thens for a particular command handler or event handler, if you're talking about event sourced systems. So that's why branching is not shown, and everything's specifically shown by example, is to be able to make everyone understand as quickly as possible what it is going on. So sure, sometimes it's more verbose. That's why we want to use different ways of constructing this event model, where we can maybe divvy it up into different workflows. There's different styles for different types of applications. I hope that answers that question.
So stupid question, maybe I didn't get it, but do you need to replicate the whole example to do a branching in another example? So say now this example follows the other branch.
Yeah,
part of
you
it.
would.
Yeah.
If it's a major one, you would. Generally, for their small things, such as retries for like a login, you would do this down here. Yeah, sometimes it's a small branch. I would show an unsuccessful registration because someone used an invalid email address or an email address that was already used, and then I show them getting the error message, and then I show them using another one, and then success, and then they try to log in, they put in the wrong password, I show them the message that they get, and then they try it again, they use the right password, etc. So by example is always going to be the best thing for you. You do not want to complicate things. Simplicity is so hard to keep in everything that we do in our lives, not just information systems. But simplicity is so hard to come by, so we must always fight for anything that we do to be simple. That's why you know, there's a rapid event modeling that allows you to just use events and screens to get going really quickly. You want to be able to say, walk into a room with people that want to design a system, and you want to get going as fast as possible. You can do this within 5 or 10 minutes by saying, give me an example of what all the screens look like, and then show me which events the system's going to have stored. We don't care how they get in there. We don't care actually in what format we're going to store them. We don't even care if it's an event source system or a domain-driven design system. I want to see by example what this thing does as fast as possible, right? I don't want you to read a book on DDD for an entire month and then maybe everyone will be up to speed in a year in the organization. I want you to explain that to me in 5 minutes, and maybe by the end of the day, everyone will understand what we're doing. Right, we want to constrict those times by keeping things simple. So what you have is very few moving parts, you know, four kind of core patterns, and that's it. And then a legend of what's allowed, which arrows are allowed to point to what. It's all your rules. It
sounds really
very simple.
Good. We said that we wouldn't do so much talking, so maybe we should transition into showing Miro.
We should do that.
I want to ask one question from the Q&A, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can finish the Q&A real quick. I'll try to keep it very short.
So I think we would just say we answered the first one. So it's like you don't really want to do like a huge model that crosses multiple teams, because you strive actually to model inside a context.
No, we do
model
both.
actually belongs to the context, right? Because outside of the context,
we model both. We've done both.
It's important to model across boundaries, but I think
absolutely.
if we look at the model itself, the model has a language, and language can change when you go across the context, and that's
fine. And you show exactly that. And we've had really large models that actually made Euro crash. And it's fine. So
it's fine.
We can. I would say that we would do it, and because the swim lanes show, so I can have this system here with certain terms in its events, and I can have a different system below with different terminology for different events. And actually, I want that to be there. I don't want an event modeling session to only be for one context. It's actually, as per domain-driven design, it's actually encompasses all of those practices. So you should be able to show your context mappers. You should be able to show all those things on one diagram so that you understand. But yes, you can dive into that. You can dive into specific implementations. You can show where it's important to show what's going on in one service versus what's going in another service, and have that shown by example, that interaction back and forth between
if you have an interest in to know the details, because that's not always the case, because sometimes you're just interested in what you can see from the outside.
Depends on the size of the organization. In a bank, you're not going to do it. In a giant multinational company, absolutely you're not going to do it. You're going to have to split it out, just like you're not going to have one blueprint for a high rise. You're going to have multiple blueprints that are going to make that high rise go. But again, you definitely have overarching event models that show how these things interact together. It's really important to still continue to communicate by example with layman's terms. And like if one team has a specific word for their ubiquitous language and another one has another one, I still want to see both of those dialects on one diagram somewhere for people to understand that this maps to this. And here's an example of how that data flows across what you call user and what you call guest.
That's probably will answer the next question, the top on the list, that do you need to know the bound context? You basically, I made this point before yesterday, and I'd like to repeat it again. The idea of bound context, I've seen many times, and I've made this mistake again. People tend to see bounded context as something they want to have. If you work with a new system, Greenfield, then it's probably true. If you work with a system that already exists, bound context is actually what you have. If you have one single thing in SQL Server and one single thing on top of it, and that's big ball of math, your context map will be one huge thing in the center. That's called big ball of math. So you'd never know big bound context up front. So I'd say what Adam is showing now is what you discovered during the modeling when the language changes and you put different terminology and you see, oh, look, we found out that there is another context. That's at least what I think it happens.
Well, what we do in the format is very similar to event storming workshops. So we do by example exploration of the problem space. It's been criticized that this is not a problem space or exercise. I've always explored problem spaces using event modeling because people love to talk about stories and what happens over time. So we can use anything to just spitball ideas. When it comes to actually having something that's going to eventually be an implementation, it's nice to at least brainstorm the different things that can happen. This is exactly what we're going to do in a minute. We're going to do all this as teams. We're going to brainstorm all the different events that happen in our particular application. We're going to put them on a timeline to make sure that it makes sense. And then we're going to add some actual UI pieces to show how this is going to work over time in terms of what people see. And then this is actually interchangeable because some people are more visual. Depends on your organization. Sometimes people start with a storyboard first, which is okay. These first, 3 steps are highly interchangeable. In the full event modeling, we do use views. We do use views and commands to basically say how I want to input data into the system. And then the green ones are how I want to display that information. And this is where we link things to show that information completeness. Later, we do the organization. I call this Conway's Law and applying of it, which has never been really used, is because this is where we, on purpose, say that we're going to make teams to look after, in this case, it's a hotel example. So we're going to use inventory for rooms. We're going to have a registration team, and we're going to have a payment team. And these teams are going to work on their particular subsystems together. Notice I'm using subsystems. I don't say domain or bounded context because I don't want to lose the audience. So when you're trying to do domain-driven design in new organizations, do not use the words from the book. Use the word subsystem for a domain, right? Do not say anything that's going to require someone to open up a book and read about something because they're just going to check out. They don't want extra work on top of their already busy day. So use common terms for what you're doing, even though you know domain-driven design. Make the bar really low for accepting what you're going to do. Does that make sense? Side by side, these are awesome. So the next article that I'm writing is basically traditional systems, including legacy, beside brand new systems, and then augmenting old systems with event-driven types of architectures or domain-driven design. And this is sort of the very easy kind of make a sidecar. But with the new article and showing that you can kind of describe what is happening to the tables underneath, that hopefully is a low enough bar to be able to describe a legacy system in just enough of an understanding so that you can show how that information interacts with your sidecar solution. So that's going to be the third article in the series, and it's a big part of the book as well. So so there's one. Okay, any more questions, or should we get going?
I guess. So one event model per story.
No, you want to really extract a lot of user stories out of one event model. An event model is really kind of like your big book. So you're going to look at the example of running the company for a year, and you're going to show all sorts of things on that one event model. Now, within the event model, you may have multiple streams where you have major different types of workflows shown by example. And you're going to have the details with the given when-thens for how a complicated report may build up over many events as they accumulate. Those are all things we're going to do live to show you right now how to do those things. So what was the last question? That was something about stairs?
Yeah, it's gone, but I have one question from YouTube, and I don't know what to say, to be honest. And the question is, from your experience, how many projects have you seen been at whatever that use DDD event modeling and event sourcing?
Well, personally, I've done them all with event modeling and all with event sourcing, with a few caveats here and there, but I bet the whole company on doing things only this way because I want that predictable cost curve. I do not want to run a company with people telling me that, oh, that developer is not that good. Why are we paying this much per hour? I want to be able to say, look, this is this is a command handler and it's specified as best as it can be. And if it's either changing information this way or it's not. And so I can pay a fixed price to the consultant for that. And if they're really good, their effective rate of pay is quite high because they're doing these very quickly. The flip side of that coin is if they screw up and they're going fast because they want to make more money, they're going to make mistakes and they're going to have to go back and fix things for free, because that's part of the contract on a fixed cost, is that if you do not implement things according to the spec, you are going to fix that omission for free. So it's a self-checking system, and that removes the entire nightmare of outsourcing work, or even internally if you have employees, of how you manage effectiveness of people without being subjective. It's like, I don't like that person, or I'm a prejudiced guy and I don't like women or something. There is no room for that if you have a very clear set of goals as to what success looks like. So this has been an incredible enablement for removing all subjectivity from success. Well, not all, but in terms of orders of magnitude, I would say all. It's a different league entirely. And so I've done these types of projects since I met Greg Young in 2008. And now professionally, as my company has done this since 2015. As a way to run an organization only doing requirements this way, because this is our requirements doc. This is what happens. The invoices at the end of a project are like a receipt from the grocery store. These are the features you bought. Here's their price, and you can, at any time, you can go to demo.your URL and try it out and see that it works. There is no there is nothing that's hidden in between to see, what quality the work was done in or whatever. So yeah, I've done a ton of these projects. I default to event sourcing by all the time, because you can fold into the other implementations if you need. You simply can't lose here's another analogy. You can't unboil an egg. This is entropy. So if you do an event source system and do event modeling, you're going to have the most organized system that I know you can possibly have. And from there, you can make sacrifices after that, but it's definitely the default. And I think a lot of people confuse event sourcing, DDD, and CQRS with really heavy, large-scale systems that require a lot of infrastructure code, and that's where they're spending their time. But as that little shell script that I alluded to earlier shows, it's just a way of dealing with information. It doesn't have any opinion on your technology stack or anything like that. And the big sort of FUD out there is that these systems are inherently more complex, and they're not. CRUD systems are incredibly complex immediately because you're introducing people that are non-technical to foreign key constraints and other things. So it's all been a kind of a BS campaign to smear event sourcing and CQRS. And these guys will have it after, like, people will come after them for setting them down bad routes and misrepresenting what they could have had if they actually adopted this a lot earlier. So there's a lot of smear campaigns saying, I only have a CRUD application. Well, what does only CRUD really mean? They're really, not representing what CRUD means in terms of the details of implementation. You want to explain SQL and ORMs to people, lazy loading and all that crap? I don't. It's a lot easier to just store an event and move on.
Yeah, so maybe it also depends on, for me it does. I guess it's also about familiarity with technology. I mean, you used to do
what technology? I used the file system. I put the event on a file system. I did system.io, file.write. There's your JSON. I don't understand what's so complex about that.
No, but I think it's well, here they all know. If they think what they know they're good at, so they're effectively in doing that. But the other way of doing it, they think it's complicated, and it's so they're afraid of turning to this. That's just the way of thinking.
Well, there is a bit of complexity involved when you talk about like devouring. When you actually build a production system, I agree with both of you. Basically, when you do a very simple thing, you can write in file system. You won't do it in production, right? So you would have some piece of infrastructure. You need to wire that together.
Sure.
You want to have read models, you need subscriptions, you need to monitor
Sure.
them, you need to trace them, you need to put metrics, you need to put
Absolutely.
contributed traces, you need to put metadata, you need to see the whole flow, but it's very beneficial. And I would say that actually essential complexity prevails still, because all that wiring, as soon as you've done it once, and there is no magic, and that's fascinating part, because
it's an
I
OC.
completely agree
It's
with
an
you.
OC in terms of complexity.
Yeah.
It's an OC. It's a constant, and people just like to slide that under the rug. Once you do it once, it's the same, and that's why
exactly
how we approach systems. It's a separate statement of work for infrastructure and a separate statement of work for features. And so if you want to ramp up and you want to go from the developer's machines onto your staging environment, that's going to, if you don't have that infrastructure, you're going to have to write it. But the features still work.
Yeah,
you can scale that up to 5 billion people. Your state transitions are still the same. Your command handlers and event handlers do not change.
And when you did the production system sort of deployment once, and you have all the wirings in place, you create a set of libraries and tools to do that, to facilitate it, you just keep it, and you repeat and repeat. The problem with things like ORM, what I experience, is basically it's a lot of magic involved. And there is no guarantee that the magic will work next time. Because
That's
next time you put a new value object in your schema, and suddenly everything breaks because entity framework bloody core doesn't support that kind of value object.
It's even more fundamental than magic. I think it's the idea that you can effectively share state across
this
so
is
many
really
things.
interesting, but I think we should move on because we can speak about
let's move on. Let's get into actual event modeling, guys. So I want to see who can actually lead. Please arrange in the Slack channel right now. I'm going to just pop open the Slack channel.
I just wanted to say that I've been 1 hour here, and that's my time to drop off. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And,
participating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Thanks a lot.
See you.
So let's, too bad we don't have Alexei. He'd be a real good host for one of the sessions, but we'll do our best to start that ourselves. So if, whoops, wrong one. This is our group here. What am I doing? Okay. Let me go on my phone because that's probably easier right now than trying to do this. Let's go back to this. All right, so we start off with a blank screen just for the purpose of the exercise. And you can have one event that you're going to start with. So what specific domains do people want to try? If we go to that Slack channel, yeah, we have quite a few people here. So I'm just going to say to please make suggestions for domains.
Insurance?
Yeah, insurance is good, although it kind of tends to be document heavy, and we end up looking at managing documents and splitting them up into areas. So I've done a few insurance event models, and I guess if you keep it on the workflow, the high level workflow of people going through claims and all that kind of stuff, it can be useful. Just kind of gets boring with document management, at least from people that are experts in insurance. It really gets into the weeds pretty quickly. So if you want to keep it at a ignorant level from consumer perspective, that might be a good way to do it.
Sure.
So sure, let's do insurance. And how many people do we have that can actually do lead a team? Because I'm going to work with a couple of people here on the hotel thing, because I'm used to that. And then some other people can follow the sort of guidelines on other domains. So if you go back to the article, when we go back to this, you can follow along by doing things in these steps, right? So if you go to here, first of all, we want to brainstorm all the different events. from your particular domain. So if I'm doing the hotel system, I'm going to definitely have some core things that I want to do, such as check-in, right? I definitely have people checking in. So we'll do it in past tense, checked in. And for now, we're not going to elaborate on the information in there, although you can. We can start saying that, you know, we can say user, and we can do jsmith@aol.com. And of course, we're going to need, what other things do we need to know when that event happened? Obviously, we want to know the room type. So if they want a king bed or whatever, we're going to need to know when they want to, you know, when that booking is. Actually, no, we don't need to that. We just need to know the time, probably. Time. This is a checked-in event, so time, noon, whatever. However, when someone reserves, so already we have another event that we need to put on in here, and that would be something like reservation made. Right, and that's going to come before that, so it's the same user. It's in the opposite order, but we're going to organize that later. So we'll just use JSmith for now. Emails make great identifiers for users, so we'll just keep going down that road. And start, we're going to have something like 2020 in the summer, 20th. And I guess we'll just do it easier to read. So we'll do length, 5 days. And that's it. So we have those things. That's how we do a whole bunch of events. I have a touch screen, so it's easier for me to zoom around and move things into the right order. So if you have a touch screen, feel free to help out by doing these things very quickly. And in Miro, make sure to add this wireframe, although we can just use squares for now if you don't have that. And the stickies are kind of your important thing here. Use orange ones for, orange or yellow will do for events. I like to use yellow recently because they're the most available stickies in any store if you're doing this on a physical board at home for yourself or eventually when you're back to an office. So you can use them as yellow. And that'll make it easier for you to actually find physical ones. And that's all you kind of need to start. So here we can start to add the name of the page. And this is all the brainstorming part. I feel free to mix all the first few steps there. If you want something more guided, feel free to separate them out. But in the interest of time, I think we can compress a lot of these steps together. So think of a storyline. To remind yourself, you can add a line to make sure that we have, whoops, let's do that again.
During this brainstorming, are you just pretty much dumping knowledge and not really worrying
Yes.
about the event name? Okay.
You're dumping knowledge, but you're discussing as well on your Slack channel or wherever else as to why you want a specific event, or if it's out of scope for your work, or start to discuss the details that it contains, like the data that's in it. So I know that right away I can show a middle of a workflow. I'm definitely going to have a few more of these. I'm just pressing Control D to just make a few example ones, and I can start to give them you know, titles that will tell me what it is, such as a book, room, and there I can show that I can have a drop down. Where's my drop down? Combo box. And so I can do combo box for the type. And obviously big room, duplicate that, move it down. Room type. And then of course we can do, I like this icon finder. You can also add that to Miro. calendar. So we can use a better one. This is kind of bad, but anyway, point made. This is a calendar that we want to use to do the start and end dates with. Time of stay. And then, of course, we want to add a button. Oops, do this one. We can change that to be book or reserve. Okay, and so that, if we want to do a complete event model, would need a command, which would be, oops, let me get rid of these guys. Command we want to show in blue, and it's an imperative, so we don't say reservation made. We'll just call it make reservation. And sometimes we have complex UIs. So what we want to do is show that which button specifically on a page was used to create that command. And then when that command is successful, it ends up, doing this. And then if we have, your itinerary maybe is your second, it kind of spits you out to your itinerary for all your bookings at this hotel site. So I want to quickly show that I have however you spell that, whatever. Of course, we can make these aligned. You see that Miro does a lot of nice things like alignment for you, etc. And here we can have perhaps just some boxes of your specific stays that you may have had. Oops. Why am I not able to duplicate this? All right, there we go. So those can be your stays. And so if I can have a view called future reservations, or yeah, something like that. And here I can show what information that is, start, end, etc. I can actually show a table if I want here. Obviously the views are a different color because we're showing information coming back out. And this is going to obviously come from this piece of information. So we can grab this anchor and join it to here. And then we're going to show that this information is shown in this particular case for this. And we can organize it and group it, especially if we have a composed UI of multiple things. We want to show exactly which parts of that UI we're interacting with. So this is the basic flow, and over here we can basically move on. We don't show any actions from menus, for example. If we show a menu action, we may want to abstract that to something that just shows me clicking on a menu. If I was to add some menu items, why not actually do that as an example? Because a lot of people ask, well, what about an action that doesn't do anything and people are just moving around? This is by example, so we're not changing the state of the system. Let's just, add something such as a menu item for, let's say, I don't know, what could we do? Add another booking, or what's something? Well, log out for sure, if we're done. If we have a logout thing, for now, we can show that later on in the year we actually go there, but over here we go back to the login screen. So can do user ID ID or email. Let's just use email, it's easier. Email, escape, and password. So I can show that from this particular click, these little anchors are really helpful because we go to the next part, and you can use this handle to just move it wherever. Adding them can screw things up a bit, so be careful how you use them. There we go. That shows that we go on to that. So let's see where people got to. This is the basic workflow for an event model. And later on, when we have payments, we can add different events to different subsystems. So over here, we can have payment made for pre-booking. So I guess maybe some hotels give you a discount, 15% off if you, or 10% off if you allow them to charge your card ahead of time. Made for booking, for reservation, or at reservation. Okay, and here we have amount, user, not in this order, you can change this later. But yeah, here we go. So that's about it. And we can have swim lanes and all that. Does that make sense to anyone? Any questions at this point about the setup of all that? So we have a few people online that have some experience, and they're sharing some Miro boards. So if you go to the Slack channel, hopefully you have organized yourselves into a few teams. So
quick question. So go, sorry.
No, go ahead.
When you're doing this with your group, are you really using the domain experts or the business folks to try to gather these events rather than engineers?
Yes, well, they both have to be there so they understand one another. So one of these things is that we're online together with people from all these different disciplines. So if a business person is talking nonsense or something that would be really, really bad from the technology perspective, like they're claiming that they can have, instantaneous SLAs and things like that, you can tell them no instead of 6 months down the road. So you want all of these different people participating from all different roles. And that's where you have that ability to basically have any kind of future meetings removed. So one of the things that's really good about event modeling is having that discussion months and months before any of it comes up in implementation, is that you're not really hitting misunderstandings when it's really too late to do anything about it, or introduces a significant amount of waste or rework. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes complete sense. I think the mental model too for all engineers, I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, so the idea, what I wanted to show you is just how quickly you can do this, right? I got a core part of a hotel system explained very quickly. And this is why people kind of scratch their heads. Why are you talking about, the small design up front, and why is it only taking an afternoon? Because it literally is this. And if someone doesn't understand why, we need to go through and explain it to them, or have them explain to us why we don't have it right. This is why it's the meeting slayer. You just destroy future meetings. You just, like, none of the agile stuff really applies anymore. Certainly your planning poker and things like that have no place. A lot of the stand-up is just ceremony. It just goes away because where everyone is and what everyone's working on. They're taking these vertical slices of this event model and working on it. I may be working on this blue piece and the screen that feeds it. I can immediately create something like this and say that Adam's working on this particular piece, right?
Can I share my screen shortly, because I have a Miro board where some people are participating, so that's good to show that you can actually collaborate online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have Rafael in here. Rafael, can you add some things?
Yes, sure. I just need to get into
You're making me
your.
do all the work.
Well, I would
Okay.
just share another screen, but then we can go back to you in 2 seconds.
Yeah, you can. I'll stop sharing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But I was going to show Rafael doing something at the same time as me.
Okay, so what was the question?
Well,
Because
no, I wanted you to add some stuff onto the event model.
well, I can get into it in like 5 seconds or something.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, look at this. This looks a lot better, and it has a processor.
It's just a scratch up with where we call it domain 1 and 2 and 3. I don't know if people are actually doing something, but at least you can see them hoover around. I mean, I can see down here you have a chat. I try to ask them something, but they don't answer. I don't know why.
So sometimes when someone's made something, I right click on the I right click on an event or a screen and do a comment. Watch what happens when you do that. So right click on one event and do add comment.
Yeah.
And then write something. What is this?
I don't think they should be giving you a bill anymore. They should probably be giving you this for free.
That's it. So now watch. Once you've left that, you see these comments. They start to pop up, and if you haven't read them, they have a little unread thing, which is really cool to show hotspots, as they're called in event storming, where people are discussing things. Like that thing needs to get some attention because a lot of people are talking about that event or that part of the workflow. So you can go in there and start to answer and clarify things, but also make sure to keep the event model as clean as possible and clean out that junk as best as possible when you're done with it. Of course, you want to keep some good dialogue in there if it's pertinent. If it's just superfluous, you want to definitely remove it so it's keeping things as simple as possible. But that's great. And I think we had one question that I got online beforehand that I want to answer.
You can also go back to your screen and then show your interaction, because then you can give a better explanation. So I'll stop sharing, but at least you get an idea of how more collaborators can
that's great.
become involved.
So if I just share this, right, so Rafael is adding some stuff. Rafael, please add the text fields for the login screen. See, so Rafael is working with me. But I wanted to show just before we quit here that I want to, maybe use a green color, and I want it to be not very, not in the way, and I want to add some text to it. I think I can add text. Anyway, I can basically say that anything that's green, it's Adam's work. I'm working on it, right? I think you can also bring forward and page up, page down. Yeah, so if I want to move this to the back so I can, have things still movable here, I can do that. I can lock things as well. So Miro and these different tools, they have all these nice facilities for doing these things.
But maybe you can post a link to your Miro board as well.
Yeah, I mean, this one's pretty trivial. I'll add that later, but it's okay. So Rafael's doing some really cool stuff, because what he's doing is he's adding I'm not sure if this is going to be here. I want it on the same one. We want a separate user. Oops. No, now we're fighting. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But what he's doing is adding the manager for the hotel probably at the top. So the workflow as to what screens the manager sees over time are done in a separate place. So yeah, he's adding the actors here, which is really good. But what I wanted to answer is that a lot of systems don't have UI. And so what we want to do is we want to enforce this cadence to having this cycle of only having this type of circular movement through information. And so if you have something that's entirely not user-facing, and some things that are maybe complex things, oh, Rafael's already doing it, perfect. These are processors, which will show that. And the other thing that we want to do is always have what Rafael's adding here is commands and events that basically form the pattern for something that's automated. And you also want to give a name to the processor so that you know what's going on. There's a good example. One client, we had a very complex thing for finding a bad word checker. So in the messaging app, you certainly want to filter out nasty words or spam and other things like that. And it gets really interesting if you're a multinational company, you need to do this for different languages. So while it looks like it's just a simple command that says send message, underneath it, the filtration and the type of orchestration to be able to tokenize the message, identify the bad words, or at least set up a dictionary for localization. There's quite a few things. So even though some of your events are not stored and some of your read models or these views are not evident, and they may just be variables that never gets put on disk, you want to actually event model them. That showed that we had one variable called tokenized message. That's actually a view into that original message. So you can elaborate complex processing by applying the same approaches and not really seeing that even though some events don't get stored or some views are not materialized, they still exist and they still explain the complexity of the system. So in that, if you take this at face value and, events are stored to disk and materialized views are things that are database tables, then you would say, oh, well, that's really easy to implement or whatever. From the business perspective, it looks like it's going to be, one event handler and one command handler. And yeah, the people are working for a month on it. No, that's because they didn't actually stretch out that logic over time. They didn't actually add any specific, details as to what is happening with the state. Even though that you don't care about the state, it's transient because either that message went through or it didn't. The logic and the amount of work that's going behind it is managing the state of that message as it gets filtered and changed and morphed to be able to accomplish that. So a lot of times what I will do, even though something is never seen by a user, is I'll put in admin screens. So I will take one of these screens here and I will, if there's no actor such as an admin or whatever, I'll make an admin screen and I will add a dashboard, and I will show how these dashboards are changing with what's happening to that invisible process for the user. So long-winded workflows for credit card processors and things like that, a user never sees that, and even administrators or managers at that company don't see that. The information might end up in the sales report or something at the end. But I want to add, even though we might never implement that dashboard, I want the event model to show what's going on and for people to understand. And the reason that the dashboard is important is because a lot of people are visual and they don't care to look at a bunch of stickies with writing. They want to look at screens as to what's happening on that. So this is much, it has a lot of similarity to a movie storyboard. So you have your key frames at the top to show what scenes are going on in the movie, but down below is your plot as to what the story's about. Hopefully that makes sense for that.
Adam, quick question on that. There, your reminder, you've got it in the swim lane, the same swim lane of your manager. How strictly do you enforce the swim lanes, and should you rather move those other processes up into their own swim lanes?
No, the processors should be in the lanes to which users they affect the experience of. I try to do that. The processor, it's really the data you want to concentrate on, where the state is stored, that tells you where your boundaries are for your subsystems. The other stuff is just helping that out. That's why I say with the rapid event modeling, where you only have screens and events, those other things don't even come into play. I mean, you might have a processor in there too to show something happening as well, but I'm hoping that that helps you understand.
Yeah, so would there be a case where you put it below the event model, like where you had the GPS coordinates being inputted, or some other system that was throwing events into it? Would you ever draw that below?
I'm sorry, again, I cut out there for a second.
Sorry, would you ever put that, a processor or something like that, in the same place where you had the GPS coordinates coming in as events in the bottom? Would you put a processor or external subsystem inserting that's independent?
I wouldn't do that. I would keep the swim lanes to just have the events, because I want to store, I really want to be accurate on and undistracted in terms of how state is changing. And so, I mean, I would, if it's getting too complicated and too vertical, like it's just too many lines and it's getting hard to navigate, I would really think about collapsing some of those and having separate event models for different subsystems. That's, I think, when you know, some of the original things that Alexei raised in the initial part of this conversation, that's where he had that made that point to only do internals of a particular subsystem. I definitely, if you're talking about a really large company, that's mostly your only option usually. But I mean, we have everything from startups to anything in the middle. So it's a different range. I think you would want to split things up if you feel the need to actually put the processor down below. The processor is really there to show that there's an interruption to the workflow visually. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
I wanted to show one thing real quick, because before I forget, and this is something that our friend has been doing for the last few months. Let me see if I can find it. Wow, okay. There's quite a lot of, just trying to find the proper YouTube link. So I'm just going to pause this. And I'm going to share again, so you can see this. Share.
Yes.
So this is Chris, who's doing a lot of awesome stuff, and he has quite an awesome channel showing the implementation from event modeling to actual implementation in a domain-driven design, event source type of application. And if you go to, oh, it's GoDev, okay. But it's Mr. Dev, but it's GoDev here for some reason. That's why I couldn't find it. But if you look at all the videos, it's insane how much work this man has put into this. It is in Polish, but he does change things to to English, and you can see. So you can see he's doing it in little pieces, 5 minutes at a time. But he originally started with event modeling just for ideas. Sorry, event storming just for ideas, and then. So that's where you can see the idea starting to take shape, and then initial attempts. So it's kind of nice to see how he has slowly evolved the approach from just trying it out for himself and then getting into some of those core guidelines and patterns that would spell out how to get that cadence that's needed bit by bit. And then obviously slicing up the work to show how you can change, how you can assign different work items to different people to do that. And then slowly looking at this beautiful sine wave that we're talking about, and the application that he designed was a Pomodoro timer application with suggested break times that vary and pretty cool features. So you can learn Polish, which is pretty hard, but you can also just follow what he's doing on the screen. And I'm hoping that I can catch up with him and do a English Polish version that's condensing all of these 5-minute video blogs and
yes,
have
of course.
kind of like a have a 2-hour one where it just goes from start to finish, and we can skip the mistakes and kind of show the ideal world of like, if you've done this a few times, how it happens. So he's even going in, like in this particular one, in number 82, he's doing the given when thens right below, which is kind of neat. It's just kind of what we want to do a lot of times. And then later it just gets into a lot of the implementation, which there's a lot of fun stuff that he's doing with all sorts of event bus type of technologies, etc. It's certainly the opposite of my shell script, which is very simple on purpose. So we do have some of the traditional stuff that you'll remember from DDD and CKRS things. So we're going to provide the link to this in the video notes, and hopefully people check it out. And then
sure.
Which is kind of neat. So anyway,
it looks like an excellent resource.
Yeah, it is. And there's links below, I believe, for everything. Where are they? I thought there was links below each video. I'm sure they're in certain videos. There's a link to all this stuff. Let me show more. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So if you show more, there's the Miro board and all the other stuff for the actual implementation. So I don't know if it's got a YouTube link. Where's the YouTube? Sorry, the GitHub link. I'm not sure if there's a GitHub link, but I'm sure it'll be updated. So yeah, yes, that's really cool. Sorry, Chris. Maybe you can talk about it. How long have you been doing this?
How long? For 140 days.
140 days. Yeah.
140 days.
So getting close to 5 months.
Yes, almost 5 months. Today I will record another episode.
Yeah.
After webinar.
So no matter what happened, no matter where he is, he doesn't miss his 5 minutes every day. It's been like clockwork. It's crazy.
Yes, I have my Pomodoro timer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every day I work 5 days, sometimes longer, because when I implementing, it's really hard to break 5 minutes because something's right.
Yeah, sometimes he goes on for way longer than 5 minutes because he's got to explain what he's going to do and then what he did. And then he's in the middle of something, and he doesn't want to stop and put it down and just cut it off. So it's a lot more than 5 minutes, I would say. It's more like 10 minutes each time. But
yes. But I work only 5 minutes.
Yes, that's
my
true.
Project.
Okay,
that's true. He's explaining that.
It's getting late, so I think we should round up with those questions we have left.
Yes, we should answer some questions, and we should go back to a shared board of what people are doing and continue to build this out. And I hope that we can continue on the Slack channel, especially the people that are in better time zones. We can continue to explore some of this and continue to do this. So,
but can you see the questions if you open the question
I'm gonna try.
panel? Yeah,
I'm gonna try Q&A. Okay, so we got
is
how much more time?
Is there a common
Adam.
thing that you find that mistakes that happen across people trying to do this that you would recommend to look out for?
Yeah, events are not things that don't change state. So a lot of times, query the sales report is not a command. It doesn't change state. Things like that. I think people want to have events kick off specific things. Let me just share the screen again here. And I want to make sure that people understand that it's really important to have that cadence because it's worth so much. This legend here tells you that you cannot have an event kick off a command directly. That's the most common mistake. You need a read model, that to-do list of what a processor is supposed to kick off for you automatically, i.e. you have to be very explicit about automation. I think it's always been under-described in all sorts of different approaches. And we make it a point to really be explicit about any kind of automation that happens. So we don't want to short circuit anything that says this event happened and then it kicked off this command and then this other event happened and this event kicked off a command. We want to know why and how it got kicked off with using what information. So these to-do lists are views for processors to understand what they're to do next in terms of the automation. That's a big, big problem that I see when people are coming from other disciplines, that they just ignore this legend here. This bottom left corner is very important. We want that cadence. We want that cyclical pattern to show how information moves up and down in the system.
So that's what it actually means. I only realized that now, that you can only go from this state to this state using the arrows there. But that's a good thing to remember. Yes.
Yeah, it forces people to be explicit about stuff that they just shove underneath, and this is where complexity can hide in systems. And you will not have it in your scope, and your project is jeopardized because you've superficially glossed over an important implementation.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the questions. Can you speak to how event modeling supports composable design of flows and user experiences? Right. So the reason we want UX and UI to be at the foremost part of event modeling is so that people understand when they have, especially single page applications these days with React and React Native, etc. You want to show that certain pieces, certain buttons, and I mean, you can get very complex, like trading systems. They have a whole bunch of buttons and usability on one screen that kind of stays the same. So what you do there is you directly link with those arrows, just like here we have a specific button going to a command. You can imagine that this specific screen could have a whole bunch of complicated stuff. You can gray out the things that are not at play and still highlight the things that are part of this workflow in terms of focus. So it's really important to make use of this UI to show how that composable UI is being implemented and what information it's getting and where it's from, etc. I hope that that explains it. So and user experience is key. Again, it's the very first thing I said. Events are the things that tell the story, and that's what's going to be stored in people's heads as they use a system. So even if you're doing the traditional system, like the other article shows, the events are key to showing what UX is, what that user experience is like. And event changes. So there is many approaches to evolve events. A good example that I use all the time is basically adding your bookstore or a video store or something like that, and you have to have all of a sudden age-restricted content. So you now, for your registration, want to ask about the date of birth of the person. How do you do that when your system's already been running for a year? You can add another event, which is called, date of birth provided. You can change the event to be a version 2, which now has a property with the date of birth. Now, if you want to get into event versioning, there's a whole book by Greg Young on event versioning, which goes over this and a lot more other things, such as how do you migrate systems to new ones, and all sorts of things around making mistakes with previous events and how to do that. But in essence, they are immutable and they are stored, and you should be adding new versions of an event if you made a mistake, or even if you have new requirements, and then you provide a map from the old to the new, so that when you're implementing your solution, you're not implementing for too many different types of events and other aspects of the system. You're only keeping with what the current system's doing, and that mapping from old event to new event takes care of that, but you certainly don't rewrite them. But yeah, definitely there's an opinion on whether you should change the event or just decorate your system with additional events that provide you that extra information. And that's really a business decision. That's something that you have to discuss with how you're going to deal with the fallout of your changing requirements with business. So maybe your business forces users that log in to go provide the date of birth, or maybe your business doesn't allow that and you have to basically not show certain books to people that registered, you know, earlier, and just give them a notice or something, or email them about it, that they have to go to the profile screen and change their, you know, provide that information themselves. So there's lots of ways. There's no one right way, and it always should go back to the business as to how you do that. Eventing and using events as a source of truth should be amicable to whatever strategy you chose. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, maybe you should read them out loud.
Yeah, sorry. So this is how do you deal with event changes? Reservation made has several fields. What if they're not required, or if there's new information related to this event? So I use that example as like, okay, well, let's try selling books, and registered event is the one that needs this new information, like date of birth, for example. So there's two ways to do that. So the question was about whether that you use small events, or add more information to existing events and make them larger events. And again, unfortunately, it's a thing that happens quite a lot. Is it depends is the answer, but I don't want to leave it at that. I want to qualify what it depends on, and it may depend on things. As I said, if it's okay for you to force people to go back and update their profile, or whether you just stop showing content, because if you stop showing content to users that don't provide that, and you kind of don't force the user to do anything, then you have to obviously change some of those views in your system, and that's going to have impact as well on your scope of how much it's going to cost to add this functionality, right? And that's why the event model is important, because you can show that to your business and to the developers that this is what's happening at this point when we want to add this particular feature. So I hope that answers that. And then we have, if a reservation sent an email on the reservation made event, how would you represent this on the diagram? Okay, so if you made a reservation, you want to send an email, that would simply be a process, or any automation is done via one of the four. So event modeling has four core patterns. This is a state change, state view, but then we have the same thing in terms of input output, but on system to system. So if we want to have external inputs, such as subscription to GPS coordinates, we do it here. But if we want to send an email, that's external state output. We do this with these to-do lists here. So a payment processor is the same as your emailer. So it could, this green piece here could, this green view could be listening for events for bookings. And this could be an registration emailer is the name of that processor. And then it would basically have a command that would use this to-do list to then send emails to different people. And your event would be email sent to show which ones have been have had that happen. This successful event would obviously mark this to-do list with that item having been done, and then this processor wouldn't pick it up the second time around. So that's how you would represent a reservation email sent. This is a very good pattern to study. It's quite nice. It decomposes to a certain amount of command handlers and event handlers that you can then use in your estimations when you're doing requirements for any kind of automation. So that's that one. Next one is, where do the email addresses at the blue sticker come from? I cannot see it on the screen. On the registration part. So is that on my, that's on this one here. So, okay, when I did this, what I had is I jumped right into the event model in the middle of the workflow. I didn't start at the beginning. I went and said the most important thing is booking. So I'm going to assume that the boring stuff is going to happen later, and I don't want to event model that right now. But yes, you are correct. That is the power of event modeling, to show that you are not information complete here. So we don't have a complete event model. I am using this, which is JSmith, and I have to ask myself, yeah, where does that email come from? Does our system account for where this thing came from? And so this is where I would use that completeness check to see that, yeah, I don't have my full requirements. This system is not going to work if I implement it with this as the requirements. I want to go back and see where they register. So absolutely, this particular question about where do the email address of the blue sticker come from? So the blue sticker obviously is, I'm not sure which one they're talking, which event model they're talking about. Maybe it's the one that I showed at the beginning, but it's in the screen. Maybe we're talking about the top of this article here. Let me just go to this one. And if we look at where does the email come from, because it's such small writing, I have to press this. Oops. Sorry for the small writing. It's here, right? User registered. And you can see that it's here in the traditional system. So the screen has the event. This is the UI that was responsible for putting that information into the system. On mine here, I didn't do that yet. I didn't go back to the left side far enough to show the registration part of the workflow. I hope that makes sense. Okay, when revenue is per feature but resources are paid monthly, how does one measure resources to cost? Well, in that case, if you, and this is a traditional development, you better have people that are obviously building those slices fast enough for you to be able to make money and keep your company in the black, or you're going to go broke if people are getting paid too much and not doing that. So it's a way of actually getting your true velocity and true costs. It's kind of looked at the other way. However, if you're a consulting company and an outsourcing company, you can do that by passing that directly onto the people you subcontract, because they're not done by the hour, they're now done by the actual work. So that reduces a lot of risk. But that's how we would do that. So yes, absolutely, this cost per slice or per command handler, per event handler is a really good anchor point for velocity in a traditional company. So this is where you would measure your velocity, and you could judge how fast someone is or how slow they are, instead of believing what's on their resume or believing on what they said about how good they are. So it shows you empirically their rate of output. So revenues per feature, but costs are paid monthly. Yeah. So that's kind of how we do things. Again, you probably want some of your core people that have been, we have, one person that has that ability. Our CTO is incredibly fast and all that stuff. So they're on a regular kind of payment. There's a couple of people that are on regular payments like that, the core team. But then anything that comes out to be extra help, you want those people to hopefully be okay with these fixed cost measures. So it depends on your organization. Hopefully that explains it. Next question is, how strict are your swim lanes for your roles? In many examples of a processor email service, what is a swim lane to another one? Shouldn't those systems be below the commands views? The reason I have the processors up in by the UI is I want to show that the little spinning circle that you see as your payment processor is working, that's the user experience. So the little processor gears are up there on the user experience side to show that there's automation happening underneath. Obviously, you could put it somewhere else, but I think this is the best place for it to show that there's an interruption in the regular SLA of how quickly the person's able to see the next piece of information on the workflow, right? It's a lot easier to discuss things with everyone from business all the way down to implementation, that right now there's a pause or a potential pause anyway as the payment's getting processed. And it's always a good idea to go to the payment processor example, because that shows where you need to show the delay, which is the user is waiting for this thing to get processed. So that's why I'm not too strict, and that's why I want the guidelines for how the implementation is actually done to be glued to where the event lives down below. That's why we use the bottom swim lanes for organizing the subsystems themselves, or domains, if you will. I hope that answers that questions. So yeah, that's why I don't put them below. What are some of the examples of domain cases that you would not want to event model? So I would not really want to event model esoteric things like cryptography, some mathematical things, but the premise of event modeling is that we are looking at the water molecules in the snowflakes, really not the fact that the snowflakes are different. So I've been only adding more and more domains that are serviced by event modeling. It's the idea that information systems aren't that special. It's really what we had with pen and paper, and that you can show the same types of patterns throughout every single insurance company, every single online banking, every single shopping cart, and every single online store. They're all doing this kind of stuff. You put something on the screen, you submit it, it gets stored somewhere. Later on, that information is used in another thing. And so going back to that famous quote from Fred Brooks, it's that if you understand that this is what your information is supposed to look like over a timeline, that is 90% of your guideline as to what success is. And I think we've been just sitting too much in the how instead of the why. We need to know about the why. And thank you for Jeff Doolittle from Oregon to really make that point. We had a call yesterday, and he definitely showed me from his perspective why the industry is really infatuated with the how, where we don't even know the why or the what. And this is answering the what. We're really knowing what it is that success looks like at the end. If we have this timeline with information changing like this over the course of running the system, and if we can show that our system is doing that, then we will have that. So yeah, the domain cases that I would not want to event model would be something esoteric, like a non-information system, which would be some calculations in math or science, maybe kernel development, even though you could probably event model quite a few, Linux kernel things, but that's definitely something I wouldn't be starting, exercising event modeling. Maybe we'll see. I'm certainly seeing how moving it further up in terms of business process description, it's quite applicable. And I'm thinking that next year we'll move it entirely out of the technology side as well, just to be able to have companies talk about their business processes this way, because the same rules apply. They're still talking about information. And if we can show that by example over time, that's the key. If you can show it by example over time and focusing on data, then this is what event modeling is built for. Hopefully that answers Sam's question. And last question here. If an event cannot directly be linked to a command, how would you design that in a pub sub system where the processor is to perform an action as a result of an event it listens to? So the good example in the article is where we have GPS coordinates coming in from a phone in our hotel system. The feature is such that you will automatically get checked out of your hotel if you opted into this thing where your GPS coordinates are published to the hotel system. And if you're far enough from the hotel on your checkout day, the automated checkout process should automatically kick in. And that's a good example of where you show externals coming into the system. And one of the fundamental sort of points of view that that helped shape event modeling as it is now is systems thinking. And if you just do some reading about that subject on Wikipedia, it means you need to be 100% responsible for things that you control. It's a closed system. You have a very good idea of what your boundaries are on your scope, and you can see where external information comes from. And absolutely, this is one of those things where we would design that by showing that event in a separate swim lane, but that event is now translated and then listened to by a read model that then a processor listens to and then sends a command. So that's kind of the standard pattern for externals. In other words, there's a read model that shows the current, to notify for checkout, and it would have the logic listening to the GPS coordinates coming from each hotel guest's phone. And once that was past the threshold, it would change its status to please send an email with the checkout stuff for this guest, and then that would then the processor would pick that up, send the command. When the event for successfully sending that email comes back, the event would then also update that that view to then not have that as a to-do item anymore. So that's the standard process, and you can see these in you can see this in here. This is the reminder, which is a similar thing, but you can imagine another swim lane down below with GPS coordinates or external systems. So that is the exception to this rule that you show. Oops, let's just go back to. Let's go back to all posts, and I guess it's the caveat to this rule in the lower left-hand corner, where some events are coming from commands that are external in a system that you don't have. So that's something that that you need to do. You need to start somewhere. So it's a circular diagram. So some of these don't have any arrows pointing to them, like the initial web page that you see. In fact, doing an event model with all the information accounted for, you can keep going in the left direction all the way until you specify the installer with what the initial values are for your config fields. So if you keep going with this paradigm, you can specify all the way up to the installer of your software. I hope that answers that question. But yeah, it's an important one. So any more questions from YouTube? And I'm going to send out a questionnaire to people about this event and how they found it, if they have further information, if they want to keep in contact, and get in line for the book that's coming out and all that stuff. I'm going to be sending out a quick little form. Not through Google, it's going to be through Nextcloud, so your information is going to be safe and sound and on our servers in Canada. So
there are some questions from YouTube. There's one question from Thijs Dosler. Sorry to come back on versioning, but do you make those versions explicit in the diagram? I mean, that's event versioning. If so, how would you do that?
So we would have an example, and what you want to do is you want to update the event model to use the latest events. However, part of the specification could be another workflow. And when I go back to my example of adding the date of birth, you would show the scenario of someone that's already a user that's coming into the system that all of a sudden can't see some of the content because they weren't asked for their date of birth. And so there you would event model that part, but you would certainly update your main event model to use the latest versions of the events so that you're not overcomplicating things. And you really want to simplify things, so you're always working with what your best understanding of the domain is at that particular moment. And you keep track of the versioning with maybe extra event models that show how you handle the situation that someone that's already a user now has to be taken care of because they never had the opportunity to provide their date of birth.
Okay, there's another question here from Neta Azort. Adam, would you have an example of how you sub out a job, as in an example of the specs and what you expect back?
Oh, spec out a job of someone that's going to work on one of these things. Yeah, so the nice thing about the event model is that you can get into these given when-thens that Krzysztof has kindly provided examples of from his own experience. But generally, it depends on your organization as to how fluid they are and how much information and how rigid those specifications are. For example, we had a point of sale system and inventory system where the really the specifications were up to us to really implement correctly. As long as this thing allowed to sell products and we saw certain certain reports, we left it at the event model without going into a lot of given when thens. But where there is more scrutiny, we certainly explode those in a bunch of given when thens. And those are pretty interesting because for something that's highly highly complicated, what we do, I'm going to use this as an example. If I have something that's complex, I'm going to use kind of what it looks like by default. That's my first given when then with no previous events. And then I'm going to have a whole bunch of previous events that can happen if I'm just pretend that these are different. We don't have time for me to edit a whole bunch of stuff right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically continue to stack up the situation as it evolves over time to explicitly say how that complicated view down here is building up. So I would have, and we did this for a trading company, which was really, really key. One of the hardest sort of screens that they were working on was a trader's dashboard. And it kind of was a living report of what's going on with a particular trade. And the best way to describe it was this. Basically, your first scenario is, what does it look like by default? What happens when the first event happens? What does it look like then? What happens when the subsequent one is in there? And so on until you've gone through a whole scenario. And in fact, what if the manager's view also has to change? We can reuse that specification right below. So we can have two different reports being specified how they look like in a certain situation. And in this case, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It would be 12 unit tests that you would have that would fall out of that specification. But it would all be tied to, you know, this particular workflow piece. So we would basically say that in this case, we are describing scenario 1, and I can put that here to say that that's our legend. So as I have my main workflow explained here, when I see a big number like this, I go below and say, oh, this is how that happens, right? We actually have two things. So we could basically have one here, and if it was, you know, if it was this guy here, if we had this one described here, then we could have that legend be here. So in other words, here's how we show the main workflow of what the happy path is and what we're supposed to see in terms of what the system does and what people are experiencing. But here is where we can explore in detail what these two specific complicated pieces are doing, right? And you do have usually when you do these projects, you're taking the most important, interesting pieces first, and they're going to have the largest amount of these scenarios. And then as your project continues, you're going to have the boring stuff done at the end, like the logins, the sales reports, the logout, all that kind of stuff is going to be very easy, and you're not even going to need any given when thens. It's just common sense of how you're going to support a screen that's going to show you have successfully logged out. Do I really need to have anything for that? No. So a lot of times the event model allows human beings to use their common sense to fill in the blanks, and that's why by example is incredibly powerful. It doesn't force you to do the same level of scrutiny for everything, and I think that's where previous attempts like UML and other frameworks fail, is because they have this discipline of doing the same amount of rigor for stupid things that are absolutely a waste of time.
Yeah, there was actually a question from the chat.
Yeah.
But that was how would you compare EM, that must be event modeling, to BPMN and other workflow notations? Maybe you just said it.
Yeah.
What is BPMN anyway?
All of them are kind of killed, but they kind of put themselves in a category of their own because they all embrace branching and they lose the entire by example, unfortunately. Anytime you introduce branching, you lose that train of thought that your human brain is built for. And this is their Achilles heel, all of them. UML, you name it, all of them. As the minute say, well, this is, look how accommodating this is to showing you all the exception cases. It's like you just killed the entire benefit of having by example, right? Yeah. So we have to see combining what Fred Brooks said with behavior driven and specification by example disciplines. You have an incredibly powerful paradigm that is so close to how our human minds work.
Yeah. But you mentioned error handling, if I heard right, but what about error handling and then the given when then things that you just showed? Do you treat errors as events, or how do you deal with that? Or
that's an implementation specific thing. It really depends on your, I mean, as Alexei alluded to, I'm sure in an enterprise situation, you're going to have, dead letter queues and all sorts of implementation specific things for things that failed. In a lot of simpler systems, you may just raise an error and just show something. I generally don't have an event for the basic system. I just put, given these events, if I do this as an example, just quickly while we're still doing this, I know we're running out of time, and thank you for keeping online here. But if I have a given and I change this to a command, so I'm going to make this blue, so it's a command. If I have this situation and it's not satisfactory, oops, sorry about that. And it is not satisfactory, I have an error in this case. I can show, I don't know what this is. Let's move that out of the way. Come on, edit please. Okay, there we go. I will just put a big, oops. I don't know what happened there. What happened there? Did I just kill Firefox? I think I did a Firefox kill. Okay, it's back. I think I hit Control Q by accident, and that just that's a shortcut in Firefox to destroy everything. Okay. Oops, I don't want that to be the background. That's what I want. And that's also not what I want. I want this to be red, and I want this to be transparent. And actually, I don't want the background to be white. I want it to be transparent. Okay, so yeah, I would have something like this with an explanation as to why. And that's if I want to throw that event away of that failure. And for those, I mean, you really have to ask yourself whether that information is worth keeping if you want to actually, for example, keep all your attempted logins failures as something that you're going to store somewhere. That's going to add up pretty quick with all the hackers and things like that. Yeah. So, however, depends on the situation. If that exception is worth keeping as a piece of information, then you would certainly have a failed event that you would store. Now, again, see how important that is to your organization. In some cases, it's if you have the storage, why not? Just keep it. It's probably a feature that you're going to want next year, and you just don't know that you want that feature yet. So this is about this is getting into event sourcing rather than event modeling, and we want to make sure that we keep the fact that these two are related but not dependent on one another. You can event model a non-event sourced system.
Yeah. But maybe we should round up here because it's getting late and
okay.
Time is running.
I want to remind everyone to join the Slack if your answers didn't get your questions didn't get answered. And
Yeah.
if you also would please fill out the form that I send to the attendees, I can then hopefully keep in contact with you and send you notes and get some other feedback from you. That'd be highly appreciated. It helps this entire discipline quite a lot. I think it's really helped me to get domain-driven design adopted in a lot of places, simply because it allows people to not get scared by the fact that there's a big blue book and other big books about it, and uses common language and common sense to organize what essentially is going to make implementing DDD very, very easy. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share that, and I hope to be in Copenhagen one day. I only passed through the airport recently in the last year. I hope to stop by and visit everyone in person. And anyway, I'm online if anyone wants. My Twitter is out there. I think people know it. And you can ask me there or any other place. So thank you. And don't forget about Krzysztof's stuff as well. It's really cool to see that in action.
Looks really awesome. And can you paste the Slack channel in here in case people are missing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe it's also in an event modeling org.
So I will go right now. I'm still sharing the screen. So if I go here, and at the top, there's the resources. And in here, there's a Slack group with the link is a link. So it looks like you can click this, but this is just an anchor to the title of the paragraph. If you want to link to a paragraph, you use this. But the link is actually here. So feel free if someone wants to copy paste that link URL for the Slack group into the chat or the comments of both YouTube and anywhere else. That'd be wonderful. Meetup.com. If you didn't get my link for the little survey thing, let me know on Twitter, and I'll make sure that you get it. Otherwise, I'll be posting it in all the channels very shortly.
Because the one way I think we could go from here is to maybe arrange smaller session with maybe 10 people, and then do real modeling on those domains. But I mean, it's a bit chaotic here, but I think we got a really good impression on how it works.
It was a tall order to cover so much in an hour and a half. I'll tell you that. So we can do a subsequent one where if you want to just arrange 2 or 3 domains, we can lead that group and just try it out. And I know that Krzysztof has base code that we can use, and we have other base code that we can just kind of get going a lot quicker. And it certainly will have some of the familiar patterns from domain-driven design. So people that are familiar or want to learn domain-driven design on the implementation side can use it as a learning tool.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for all the volunteers that joined. Hoping